Alrighty, and welcome back to Cibolo Creek Conversations. I'm here with Mr. Paul Wilson, but also our good friend, Mrs. Kristin Burford. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing good.
Yeah, excited to be here for the video
podcast.
Yeah,
because you were one of the first episodes that we did a long time ago.
Yep.
If anybody hasn't listened to that, they should go listen to it. But Kristin, in case somebody, for some reason whatsoever, doesn't know who you are, introduce yourself briefly and just kind of say what you do at Cibolo.
Sure. So at Cibolo, I'm the adult ministries pastor, which today means that I care for several different teams.
I like how you say today.
Today, ever changing. But you know, it
This
has
is
been
true.
10 years. So
Is it really?
yeah,
That you've been in that role?
No, it's coming
No,
up
that
on
you've
10.
been on our staff.
Yes. So in 10 years, my roles have changed.
Oh, okay.
So
So,
that's why I
yes.
say today.
Yeah,
And
time goes by fast, huh?
it does.
I was
it does.
6 in August.
What? Really? That's
Oh.
crazy.
If you count intern years, which I do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. You're
I
good.
thought you meant I was 6 when she started on staff.
If you were going to agree with that,
I was 15.
throw the headphones
I was
down.
confused.
walk out.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So today, I care for the welcome teams, which is guest services and hospitality, for local outreach and global. So kind of both ends of the spectrum, people coming in and then people walking out their faith on the other end, and then our prayer team as well. But I'm also a wife and a mom, probably my first roles.
Not
Not
probably.
Not probably. Definitely my first role. So I have a 27-year-old, 22, and soon to be 15, just entered high school.
Very nice. Yeah, and he does fishing with my dad.
He does. So Wyatt's dad is his fishing captain this year.
Oh, okay.
For the
Just
fishing club.
Super
right?
exciting. Yep. Bass Club of Champions. A lot of fishermen at Cibolo Creek in the youth group. So yeah, fishers of men. I mean,
Yeah,
there you
we
go.
There you go.
Somebody
I don't
had
know
to say
who's
it.
luckier. Is it Tim or is it your dad?
I think they're both happy with the situation.
There
My
we
dad
go.
was kind of frustrated last year because the guys just weren't into it as much as he was.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he's very happy that Tim is sold out.
They're both very excited. I do see my fishing bill going up though at
Mhm.
Bass Pro Shop, but no,
Yep.
it's all good.
Yeah, my
All
mother's
good.
complained about that once or twice.
I
What's
mean,
that mean? If you teach your kid how to fish, you'll steer them clear of alcohol and drugs and all those things because he won't have money to spend.
That's
on
exactly
anything.
right. That's exactly all poured into boats and
Yeah.
fishing gear.
My mind went like, oh yeah, because like he's spending out time, like he knows more like the quietness of life and solitude and God and
No,
stuff.
it's just-
Nope, he's broke.
That's exactly
Uh,
right.
Well, Mr. Wilson, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good, very good. Are you? I know we've been talking since sabbatical, but I guess you're probably finally back into the. You're probably back into the new swing of things.
Closer than I was. Still kind of wish I was on sabbatical.
Yeah, don't blame me there.
But no, starting to feel engaged again and got plenty on my plate, so no time to be wasting.
Yeah.
I had lunch. I was going to tell you guys I had lunch with a friend this afternoon and found out he listens to the podcast pretty regularly.
Oh,
And we had an interesting conversation. I was asking him, tell me about your experience and what do you think? And he says, I'm still kind of getting used to how long it is. And I said, oh, please don't start with this. We got lots of people who have questions
just
about
pause
that.
it. Goodness.
Yeah. No, he spends a lot of time in his car. So he listens then. And I said, do you listen like to the whole episode at one time or do you kind of break it up? He says, generally because of him getting in and out of his car during the day, he kind of breaks it up. But he really enjoys the conversational format. And he really enjoys getting to know you. He
Oh, yeah?
mentioned specifically, I'm enjoying getting to know Wyatt and a little bit of what makes him tick and how he thinks. And
Well, I put it out there.
Yeah.
So I don't hold back a whole lot on this thing.
so Wyatt and I celebrate anytime we have a conversation with somebody other than our moms who listens to the podcast.
Yeah.
There's plenty of listeners.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with people who listen as well, so you're not
Were
the
they
only
good?
one. They were good conversations. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And people who've learned things from the podcast, more importantly.
Yeah.
So
Oh, good. that's kind of what we would hope, is that people listen to the conversation. Because I mean, like, I do hardly any prep for this, and I know a little bit more onus is on, you guys, I guess, and Paul. But just learning, like, the flow of the conversation, because, like, stuff comes up, I learn stuff in it. So if I'm learning stuff in it, I would hope other people also listen and learn while they listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at the very least, ask themselves some questions.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
think I've heard that a few times too. It made them think differently, which
Yeah.
is great. Super.
Well, very good. Well, so whenever I wanted to have Kristin on the podcast, I asked her some things that she might want to talk about, knowing that us three can have great conversations, so I wasn't let down by your answers. But we're going to start off with the local church. And so I guess I'll just open it up this way. What is a local church? What is its function? What is its purpose? What is it supposed to fulfill?
Who's starting?
Makes no difference.
You're the one in graduate school.
Yeah. So one of the things I didn't mention that has changed in life is that I have been taking seminary classes. And I think when you asked me that, probably that played into why I said, let's talk about church
I
and what
figured
church
so.
is. There's this, I don't know if this is true, Paul, if you've heard this, but I've heard lots of folks who've been through seminary say that that's the role of seminary, is to sort of break down what your beliefs are first and then
Build
kind
them
of build them
up
back up. Yeah, I thought,
like
well,
the Marines,
that's kind of, yeah. I'm not sure I like that situation, but it happens.
right?
And so I think my understanding of and maybe my appreciation for the local church has really shifted because of those
Mm.
conversations that we've had, theological conversations, but also the interaction of church and culture. It's just been a really great reminder of the role of the local church, and really probably bigger than that, the church being where kingdom is walked out.
Mm.
So I don't know if
So
it's okay to go ahead.
what in your mind is the local church?
Broad enough for you?
Great question. That's a great question. So you would think, right, as someone who is over local and global, and that's where my passion is, I could very easily go into uh, the local church is the capital C. Anybody that's out doing work in the name of Christ or kingdom work, people like to call it that, is the church. Anybody actively participating in the body of Christ out in our world. But I don't think that. I do think the local church is a gathering of people that have committed themselves to one another and to their mission for Christ in their community and the people that they interact with. And I'm even starting to feel, as far as that maybe, okay, so there's this school of thought that if you aren't in a local church, no matter what you're doing for Christ, you shouldn't call it kingdom work.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
That's great.
What's an example of that? Like, when
So,
you're talking about, like, missionary?
so that's where a lot of people go first, right? Is
Yeah.
missionaries. I'm still struggling with that one
Yeah.
because I think on some level, missionaries, particularly missionaries in the 1040 region, where you can't plant a church, you can't proselytize, so they're teaching people about Christ in other ways.
Yeah,
Right.
your work would be cut short if you
Yeah.
were like, here's a church.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it falls apart there. That's the part I'm struggling with a little bit. But I do think in this era of church hurt versus church abuse, hopefully we'll talk about that in a little bit, deconstruction, that it's really easy for people to say, well, I'm going to go do this thing on my own with an organization, or just on my own. I'm going to go serve. I'm going to go on a mission. And that takes the place of
Yeah.
being connected to a local church. And I think for a lot of reasons, that's become our new lingo that's can be hurtful to God's work in our world.
Yeah, people get a little too liberal with the verse where two or three are gathered, like there I am, and then they just like, well, that's a church, and it's like, well, I don't know, right? Like I feel like that's a justification that can be used to support that. What are your thoughts?
That would be, in my mind, a inappropriate justification.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like
That's how you're
in her example of people who are not part of the local church,
Mhm.
but they're with three buddies.
Yeah.
That's not the local church?
Not in my mind, no.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was saying.
So the exercise I do from time to time is try to imagine church without any of the contemporary structures or systems. Imagine no buildings. Imagine no staff. Imagine no Sunday morning services. No ministries, no, children's department, student department, adult department. Imagine none of that existed. Can a local church still exist? In my mind, yes.
I agree.
Okay. My mind is that a local church, kind of teeing off what Kristen said, there's the universal church, that's Christians the worldwide. But we're talking about local church. So I think a local church is, I like the word family. It's a group of Christians who have united or banded together as a family to do one thing, to do what Jesus invited his disciples to do. And so as long as they're doing that, they could do that anywhere. They could do that at any time. And in many ways, they could do that anyway. They don't have to do that. Like, we're going to sing some songs and we're going to have a message and we're going to do this and that. So independent of all those contemporary structures that we assign to the words going to church, like even going to church is really incompatible with the design of church. We are the church. We just happen to all live in the same city, get together in a variety of environments, hopefully to grow in our faith and to do the work that Christ has called us to do. And when I imagine that kind of a scenario, I think we're getting back to the truest expression of what Christ thought of when he thought of the church, certainly without all the professional organizational trappings that the church is attached to these days.
Yeah.
So I like family, brothers and sisters in Christ, and you know, local meaning, again, what Kristen said, a group of people committed to serving their town, their city, the people that are their neighbors.
Where you live, right?
Yeah, it's where you live. And as you go to work, as you go to school, as you go about your social routines of life, you are an ambassador of Jesus Christ, and you're doing what a disciple of Jesus does. And that to me is the truest expression of a church. Now, granted, there has to be some sort of a organization or assembly of, how do you get all these people together? And that ends up bringing in some sort of organizational overlay. And I think the early church had some sort of organizational overlay, but I don't think it was anything close to the corporate or overlay that the local church knows today.
Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me about the Acts Church was it was counter to their community. It was counter to their world. It was counter to the things that were happening in their culture. And when there's a group of people committed to the same things, working out Christ's way of how we deal with one another, just like in a family, it is a witness. It's what says to our world, they do things differently. Why? Or they handle conflict in a way that our world doesn't. So I also think it's really important that the local church be different. That, and that sounds simplistic, but in our world today, because, the Acts church, they didn't have a comparison. Even early church, there was no comparison because there was no YouTube, there was no social media. You weren't watching other churches.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't know what the church in, the city 3 cities away, how they were doing church or what they were doing. And I think now we have started to look like church looks like a lot of other things in our world. It looks sometimes like a concert, or it looks sometimes like a theater, or it looks sometimes like, just it isn't a whole lot different. And I think that's part of the deconstruction process is why would I do church if I have all that? I can get all that
You have
anywhere.
access to that on social.
I have access to that anywhere.
Yeah, you're essentially just a community group at that point. Like
Exactly. And we're not committing. I think this is where I'm starting to be really passionate about. Paul, you and I have talked about this. Our church backgrounds are similar. And there's a lot that I can look back on and think, maybe not great. But there's a lot about that environment too that planted this foundation of family. So just as an example, I have a lady who was my Sunday school teacher like for a lot of years, who today, every single morning, 5:30, I know it's her because my phone makes a buzzing noise. She sends me some devotional.
Mm.
And I was thinking the other day, that's the depth of what that church committed to in people over time and over generations, and even amongst the ugly of a bunch of humans all being together, having to work that out, there was some foundation there that we're missing. And so that commitment to a local church over time, not if you're being abused, not if there's, things that are fundamentally wrong, but if you're leaving for reasons, I think we have to look at the reasons why you leave a church, because you do a disservice to yourself and you do a disservice to your family when you're pulling up those roots and trying to replant them other places.
Mm.
I agree.
I had a note on that. You were talking about how the church oftentimes they're kind of cookie cutter, so they all kind of look similar, and we're trying to attract the culture in a way. So like in our attempt to get more butts in the seats inside the building, we've trained our people to be consumers. And then whenever they're upset with some product that we have, because their mind is changing along with the culture, we're surprised that they then deconstruct or they leave. And it's like, well, we've trained them to be this way, and then we are upset at them. I don't think that's fair. And I know that none of that, hindsight's 20/20, right? But in churches' attempts to be attracted to the culture and to mirror it almost and not do what you said, that's been the consequence.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you think, though, yes, I agree with you, Wyatt, on that. We have trained consumers to some extent. The evangelical church has trained consumers. But I also think we haven't always behaved as a family where you allow doubts to be expressed and heard. And I think if we gave more room for that and allowed for that, there would be less walk away. I think one of the best definitions, and I know we're not there yet, but one of the best definitions I heard about deconstruction, um, it separates it into kind of two different pathways of that. But the healthy deconstruction, um, they talk about people deconstruct and step away because it's really about doubts. It isn't about turning their back on Christianity altogether. It's, I have some questions, like these things aren't marrying up and I have nowhere to go with them. So it's just easier to walk away, or safer to walk away. And so, yeah, we've trained consumers, but I also think I don't think we've made space for those questions.
Yeah, and so I would say yeah, I agree, and I don't even think that it is in contention with what I said, because whatever we were selling, whatever a church that doesn't allow doubts is selling, well, the consumer didn't like it, and so we got upset, right?
Mm.
So yeah, no, I completely agree, and and we can get into that after a while, but like obviously what the doubts are and how the church responds is incredibly important, because I've heard a lot that churches apparently it's not common that churches or even Christians deal with answering or fielding those questions. I think that probably comes from insecurity of not knowing how.
Right.
And so some of this deconstruction thing is actually helpful, because it makes you have to understand your position and justify it. And like we write what Peter says, have a reason for the hope that you claim. So yeah, I completely agree.
I go back again to the family thing. So much of our contemporary expression of church is it's a presentation, it's an experience, it's something that you come and watch. It's a spectator kind of sport. And we put so much time and energy into those large, public gatherings that most people, I mean, they have to really dig down deep into the life of the church to begin the relational connection to where they feel like family, and they have to be with it for a while. It's interesting at Cibolo right now, we have people who've been there for, you know, 20, 25 years, and they have a depth of relationship and a loyalty to each other that I it's just unparalleled. It's just beautiful. And, fortunately I get to be enmeshed in some of that because I've been there for 25 years. And I am convinced that they experience Cibolo Creek in a way that's very different than some of our newest attendees who haven't been around and don't have a history, don't have an affinity with, the mission and the heartbeat and the DNA of our church. And so that may just take time, but they just really don't connect with our church in the same way that these other folks do. And and if all their experience for the new folks, if their only experience is I come on Sunday mornings and I watch and then I leave, or I, participate in a serving opportunity now and then, but I don't do groups and I don't get involved in a, weekly serving team, then they just don't build the relational connection that ends up in time feeling like family. And because of that, then it's just easier to leave it. It's just easier to find something else to do on a Sunday, or something's more attractive or pressing. So I, my heartbeat is, and my dream is, how do you create a family that's a family feel and a family dynamic that's so rich that uh, whether we ever had services again or not, there'd still be a loyalty and there to one another, and there'd be a thirst to, what are we doing to help our city? What are we doing to encourage one another? There's just a real natural, organic sort of love for each other based on a shared faith in Christ. It wouldn't need any of the structures.
So when are there any like overarching principles that and an order of principles, not hierarchy, calm down.
I'm going back to overarching or overarching.
Depends if you're literate. Apparently I'm not. But are there any principles that the church or roles that it should play, some functions that it should play? So like maybe let's just name some of those. Like what is there a 1, 2, and 3 of this is our first goal, no matter the church? Like the local church.
I would say so.
By all
So,
means.
first of all, I think family, the body of Christ, brothers and sisters united around a shared faith in Jesus. I think ambassadors, and I'm looking at that more from a gospel sense, that they are to be witnesses on behalf of Christ to their friends, their neighbors, their relatives. So they're ambassadors in their community. And then servant, um, truly driven from a heart to want to help other people in their home, in their neighborhood, in their schools, in their workplaces, as an expression of the love of Jesus for those around them. So, family, ambassador, and servant, this immediately pop in my mind is that is what the church is. And I'd go so far as to say if the church isn't that, then it's not really a church. Not in the truest biblical or spiritual sense of that word.
And I think all of those cover exactly what the values are that you laid out, is that we value the gospel
Yeah.
first and foremost, and we value authenticity, which I think is wrapped up in what
Mm.
you said, is like, just not pretending that
Yeah.
we have it all together, or leaving space for those questions. Being together, you know, it's a little bit different when you're together in person. It
Yeah.
just is. I mean, there's,
Not even a little bit different. It's
yeah, there's
enormously
something.
different.
Yep.
Yeah,
And we
so
hear
much.
those stories all the time about people who did come back after, a year or two, and, just broke down crying in worship, just
Yeah.
because the sense of that is so different. And then compassion. I mean, those four values, I think, were brilliantly laid out. And if we're not that, there's a problem. I also think that one of the roles of a church is what happens amongst each other. So, we can talk from the front, we can play songs from the front, we can offer all the things. But one of the most important ways that church is walked out are in those little moments of interaction or crisis or joys or I need helps, just the one on one of those personal relationships. And um, it just doesn't make any sense to say that we're a church and do all the things on a Sunday, and then somebody is sitting in their home, lonely, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. They call the church, they try to reach out to someone, and nobody from their life group responds, or we don't respond, or whatever. It's just how we walk that out in our world is as important as what we do on that Sunday morning, if not more.
Yeah, which goes back to my earlier comment is if you take away all the structures and the systems, do you still have a family that's caring for each other and doing the work of Christ? And I think it's possible, yes. But you're describing it exactly the way I see it is if somebody comes to our services, but they're dying a slow death of, some sort of trauma in the privacy of their home because nobody knows them and nobody cares for them, then we are missing the point. We're not translating what we learn in a service to basically the expression of obedience.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of churches have felt cliquey in the past. And I'm sure that those types of things exist, in every church to a certain degree with certain people. So like that's a problem. But then I guess like with those people that come, because like for instance, there could be somebody that comes and sits into the Sunday service and then dips right after every single Sunday, and we would literally have no idea they were there if they didn't want to know. And so, like, I guess we we just have to take responsible for like all that we can do to try to get that person connected, right? You're in a assimilation, so I'm sure this is like top of the mind because it's like we can't beat ourselves up if that person never tries to connect at all, but then gets angry if we're not connecting with them, and it's like, well, we didn't even know you were there.
Yes, as long as we're making the
Yes.
efforts fully, absolutely. And that's okay. Do you know how many stories we have of people coming for long periods of time, sitting in the back, dipping out, and it just they were not ready to say, I'm here and I need to ask some questions. And I think too, I think we also have to it's taken me a long time to get this place, but just be okay with God's timing
Yeah.
on some of those things. You know, he could do all of this without any of our running
Right.
around and putting all the programs in place and all the people. And, you know, as church staff, we angst about all those things. And sometimes you just have to step back and go, it's okay. God knows they're there. And if you're faithfully doing what I've asked you to do and you're, you know, living within your gifts and watching for the places that he needs you to be and attuned to that, then you're right. I mean, that's what we can do and then trust that God's gonna use that in some way. And there's just been too many stories over, you know, the 10 years I've been there. Well, been at the church longer than that, but on staff, there's just so many stories of people. And I immediately, when you say sit in the back and, you know, dip out, I see those faces today of that happening and just thinking, it's okay. There's seeds being planted in some way, and we're being faithful as a local church to be a place where they can come, sit in the back, and dip out until they're ready.
Yeah, I mean, that's like my family for a good portion. Like, I mean, they knew people, but they weren't involved really. They just came and they consumed the thing, but that was also where they were at, kind of like in their walk with Christ. I don't like the term spiritual journey, but
I was just gonna say spiritual journey, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like,
No, I know you and your new agey
oh
phraseology.
my
My goodness.
Now we just found a new
That's
topic
so
for our
funny.
next podcast.
But you know
Just
what?
call it what it is.
But there still is a push, right? So
Yeah.
at some point, and I think y'all talked about this a little bit, I don't know which podcast, but there is a point at which you do have to say, consider the fact that you need to take a next step. Like we have to continue to push and offer that, you know, your faith isn't stagnant either. So
Yeah.
it's a balance.
No, you're completely right. Because I think I've even said before, like if somebody's been coming for a long time, I would, because I've heard people complain about pressure from different pushes or campaigns that we've even done, whether that be for giving or to do this or that or volunteer, or get involved or do small groups. And I'm just like, I'd rather them feel uncomfortable if it's been years than not, because if there's no grinding or if there's no pressure, then there's not gonna be a whole lot of reason for them to step out of wherever they're currently at, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, people, the truth of the matter is, and this isn't a slam on anybody because it's true of me too, is we're inherently spiritually lazy. Our
Yeah.
hearts are not naturally inclined to pursue full devotion to God. That's just because of sin nature. And so, really, the nature of your spiritual influences in your life, like you might think of that you find at a church, whether that's your pastor or peers, is there has to be a sense to which they push, that we call it encourage you to take your next, but there has to be some sort of an invitation, challenge, inspiration to go, okay, you're here, but what's the next step? Where's the growth areas? It's just like somebody who works out with a personal trainer. That personal trainer at times says, okay, we're here, but we need to go here. So I'm going to ask you to do more of this or harder than this or, more weight or whatever the workout is. And you're like, oh, I don't want to do it. It's so hard. Yeah, but it's in the hard that you get stronger or
Yeah.
more fit. And so, yeah, the church can be relentless at always pushing into where it's overwhelming. But ought to be this encouraging, loving, um, courageous challenge to say, okay, you're here, but you need to be here. Like we all need to be somewhere next. Okay, let's push you that way. Let's challenge you that way. And the church that doesn't do that, and again, I'm not saying it does it every time, but the church that doesn't speak that kind of language about your next step or your next area of growth, it's just going to create lazy people and consumers, people who look for the easiest way out. And I don't, I mean, I look at the language of Jesus and he wasn't looking to create that.
Yeah.
He asked for hard things because he knew that one, we wouldn't naturally tend that way. And two, the real blessing that he has for us is really on the hard side of things because of the faith and the um the devotion it takes to get there.
Well, and those people who don't ever take next steps, or they do just become stagnant and kind of lazy, those people are probably the first to go as soon as they either hear something they disagree with or something gets kind of hard, just because there's not a whole lot of buy-in on their end. There's not a whole lot
Right.
of investment. They don't, maybe they're like distant cousins, but they ain't family really, right? And so, yeah, they're gonna go, and then we're gonna wonder why, but it's just they weren't really
Yeah.
involved. They didn't feel like they were part of that family because they never wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Kristen said about particularly us as pastors kind of learning to give ourselves the grace about living within God's timing. Is everybody's at different places. They have different stories and different, catalysts that are going to, drive them. One of the early principles of creating, a seeker targeted or seeker sensitive sort of environment was you allowed people to have anonymity. And that doesn't mean you were unfriendly. That doesn't mean you made no efforts to get them connected to relationship. It's just that you had to honor the fact that they might want to remain anonymous for a while. And you respect that and you allow that. You don't push, things in their face and say, you got to sign this and you got to do this. You allow them to be anonymous, but hopefully you're providing a compelling enough atmosphere and you're making clear the invitation. We'd love to see you get connected to our church through friendships with other people. So here's opportunities for that. You honor the anonymity, and then you trust the process and the work of God and the invitation that you're putting out to then watch them move. But man, and I'm sure Kristen could tell a story too of people who were at our church for a long time before they ever connected relationally. Like I'm in the middle of one right now. Um, a woman made an appointment to come, see me, talk to me about something. I didn't know she had attended Cibolo Creek. I know now she literally sits in the last row that we have every Sunday. And I don't always get to meet people coming into services because of all that's going on. I like to stand out front or at our back door and greet people, but I don't get to greet everybody. So I didn't know she attended Cibolo. Found out she had some really difficult challenges in her marriage and with her husband's health that created challenges in her marriage. And she came in and she was just trying to make sense of that. Well, that was one little, next step. Otherwise, she's just sitting on the back row. And then sadly, she lost her husband and she invited me to do the funeral. Well, that's a next step. It's just a little bit more ground gained. And then I didn't see her for months because she was hurting. She was steering clear. And I saw her a couple weeks ago. I was out front greeting folks and I saw her walking up the sidewalk. And, just the power of remembering her name. And you can just, she absolutely hates it when I like make a big deal. You know, very energetic sort of celebration that she's there. She's, "Oh, no, no, don't do that." And I, you know, try to be careful I don't go overboard on that, but you can just see the light in her eyes, like, somebody knows I'm here, somebody knows my name, and I think she would be willing to admit, "I haven't made much of an effort. I just come and I dip out. I leave. But I'm praying for her. I have one of our guest services members who's now identified her, and I together, this guest service member and I were like, we're gonna keep greeting, and
Love
we're gonna
that.
keep making a fuss, and we're gonna keep praying, and there's gonna come a day that she's a part of the church family, not just an attender who comes and watches.
And there's such power in I love it when you say that one little next step. There's power in us as the church celebrating those steps, like those
Yeah.
little bitty steps. It doesn't mean, and not judging that she's not in a life group or she's
No?
not, walking into a class or any of those things. We hope that for her. We hope that there's some of those things, but it is a huge celebration that she's willing to take
Yep.
in her context, in her life, those baby steps. And I think that's where as a church, when you put in all those things you were saying, the processes, and you add all the things that weren't there, we start to want those things to work well and to
Yeah.
be effective, right? But sometimes then it's really easy to cross that line and go, well, they're not in this or they're not doing that activity, and we lose sight of just the person themselves and the context in which they're battling for their own faith
Yeah.
and understanding. And I think it's where, that church hurt thing has blossomed,
Yeah.
is in the way that church has encouraged people to do all the church things, and when
As
they
some kind of a measure
as some
of
kind of
that
a
person's
measure,
Yeah.
yep,
devotion.
as
Yeah.
some kind of a measure, and then when they didn't, there was some sort of judgment placed on that,
Yeah.
or when life fell apart, well, then you should have been doing, or those
Yeah.
kinds of um, attitudes and verbiage. And so that is church. That's what I think a lot of people are calling church hurt, are those kinds of things
Yeah.
that is not the same as church abuse.
Sure. Sure.
So
Yeah, that's like the negative side of what people always call like the religion, not tradition, but it's just how rigorous you are about you have to be in these things. Especially whenever it's like they're not even while you're reading the scriptures, like, well, you in our church's Bible study, it's like, well, why does it always have to be your version of whatever that thing is? Granted, the church providing those things is what helps build that familial connection.
the experience.
Yeah.
Ooh, familial. Good
Familia,
job,
I'll tell
buddy.
you, I got that one.
Yeah.
I mean, not overarching. We always talk about words that I'll occasionally come up with.
And I'm just going to sit here and listen. I have no idea.
But also to what you said, like just remembering somebody's name, I had a case like that with a guy that used to go to Cibolo. I think he kind of dipped for a while. I'm not really sure, but I saw him at the gym and I knew his name. And he was like, wow, remember my name. I had recently seen him somewhere on like social media or something. So he was like top of mind.
Yeah.
But I had also met him in the past, so I already knew. But anyways, it was still fresh. But like me walking in on a Sunday, granted, I'm on staff, so like people know me. And, having 6 people say like, hey, Wyatt, morning. Like, that's awesome. And like Allie being able to come in and like have her different friends that she's made, and like Clarita and Carlos, and like being able to be excited about seeing people
Yeah.
at the place where, at your church. It's something that I think is being lost. And I think a lot of that just comes from the numbers. I have some theories on this, but like the church has kind of lost some of its function, both the consumeristic mindset, but then also the fact that people don't live nearly as close together as they used to. Granted, they have neighborhoods, but we also have cars, so we can go and pick whatever instead of being kind of stuck there with the people that we live next to, our neighbors.
Right.
And
True.
and so being able to drive has kind of destroyed a lot of stuff, all the way down to the family, to the church having that family-like feel.
Yeah, looking back on my experience growing up in church. Yeah, it was Bible preaching church, theologically deep and rich church. It was evangelistic, all of those things. But what I really treasure about it is the relationships. So, I mean, there were men in that church that were not as much, but they were like dads to me. And there were women in that church that were like moms to me, and not just to me, but to all the kids. And I know everyone is not necessarily on board with this, but those church
I
potlucks
knew
that
it was
we had,
coming. I knew it was coming.
that was family. That was like a family reunion. And
The church potlucks are essentially the outdoor service that we had that everyone raved about, except the food was from a place, right?
yeah.
Okay, so I brought one of my school books
Uh-oh.
specifically because somehow I knew
You knew I'd come
you're
in.
going to talk about potlucks. If we're going to talk about church, you're going to talk about potlucks.
Let's see, Acts chapter 2. And
So
they
listen
met
to this.
together in the homes and they ate. I bet you those were potlucks. They weren't catering that.
Everybody bought bread.
So I'm reading, I literally underlined potlucks in here. And it says, if a flourishing fellowship is the essence of the kingdom, we need to shape church life into kingdom gatherings by enhancing opportunities for fellowship. How can we do this? Small groups that don't overdo the Bible study or theology study dimensions, but include generous times for sharing life. Potlucks or social events for the whole congregation.
So wholesome.
Amen.
They're so wholesome.
They are. Thank you,
Wholesome's
Wyatt.
a great word. We need to go back to it. I've always been on your team on this, by the way.
Oh,
If you get
goodness.
anything out of your
Goodness.
graduate school studies, I sure hope it's that.
It's that.
I've always said people just need to invite people to their home for dinner
I mean, you've been saying dinner and Jesus
Yes.
for years.
like for a
For
long
years.
time.
I've been on
Yeah.
this for a while.
I'm
I
all
know.
for the fact that a small group is completely, or a life group is completely legitimate. If they got together, they shared a meal with each other, they prayed with one another, go home.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, that is as much of a spiritually rich experience as any. Let's go through this curriculum and answer these questions.
Before the Chapmans up and left, me
Not bitter about that.
me and the Chapmans, well, I get close to Stuart and Deb, and then they go. And I'm like, dang it. Anyways, me and the Chapmans, their whole bunch, would always go over to the Hints, not always, but many Fridays, we'd go and have like Shabbat dinner over there. I think you came
Yeah.
a couple times. And Kate would bake bread, we would do communion, but then we would just eat, and all the kids are playing, and then we would inevitably start talking about something, faith related or theologically
Sure.
related. Chad Henson's there, and he likes to think about things like me, and so, all of them are pretty deep thinkers anyway. But that was
as much
as-
church as a
Yes.
Sunday morning.
Yes.
I
In
said
fact,
it even at the time.
maybe more.
Yes,
Yep.
honestly, the last question you asked us in preparation was, is the local church still relevant? If we're doing that, it's still relevant.
Still relevant.
Like that is the thing that is relevant today in what we need.
I remember years ago, this was before we came to Texas, we were in Wisconsin, and our church there had small groups for people. And so Charlotte and I were in this small group with, 3 or 4 other couples. Really lovely people. They were friends of ours. The guys in the group, every Friday we got together and golfed. I mean, I love these guys. And so we're really close, these 6 or 8 people. But Charlotte found the small group meeting lacking. And I remember one time driving home after the meeting, and she wasn't really excited for having been there. And I was like, so what's disappointing to you? She says, well, when we arrive, we all end up in the kitchen. We all end up sitting around the table and we're, eating pie or chips and dip, whatever. And the conversation's so warm and natural and authentic, and it's all so good. And then inevitably the leader would say, okay, let's go down to the den downstairs. Let's go down and do our study. And we'd, go down the stairs with our books, and we'd all sit around the couches, and then we'd be like going, well, what'd you get out of this verse this week, and how'd you answer that question? And she said, and then it just stopped being a rich experience for me because it was all so plastic and rote and predictable. And she said, it was in the kitchen that I felt loved. I felt like I belonged, that I felt like it was warm and encouraging. And then we went to the Bible study. And again, I'm the last person to say anything wrong about studying the Bible. But the context of that in the group can get really plastic and empty, and it's not necessarily the same sort of rich experience. And I found that so instructive when
Huge.
she made me aware of that. I was like, yeah, I see exactly what you're describing. And so never underestimate the power of the kitchen. Never underestimate the power of a potluck when it comes to knitting the body of Christ together. I mean, I'm not being facetious. Acts chapter 2, one of the central activities of the local church was people getting together in homes and sharing a meal. I don't think that was by mistake. I think that was by design, because sitting around the table, you're generally like close enough, looking each other in the eye. You can have some really wonderful conversations, and God can be praised through what's happening there. And I'm a big fan.
You can be praised and you can grow. You know,
Yes.
we've equated growing in our faith to walking through a written Bible study.
Yep.
And I just, we had such deep conversations the few times that I went to what you're talking about, Wyatt. Deep conversations about faith, relevant to what was going on in our lives at the time. And the life group that we were part of for 10 years, the same thing. It was, tough life situations that we were going through and how we applied our faith to it. And that was not walking through a Bible study, but it was going to the Bible, going to scripture, like, what does God say about this stuff?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and that's also a great place, like, where you can bring those doubts and those questions, or, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this," or, "I don't know if I agree with this." Well, let's talk about it, like, as with your friends, with your family.
Yeah.
Um, but also too, I think some of that is, like, that that dinner. All of us studied and read and spent time learning and doing, like, that study part on our own regardless, because someone who's been following Christ for a long time, like, I think the expectation is that you are spending a good amount of time in the Word, thinking about these things and praying and having conversations with God and, trying to grow in your faith. And perhaps maybe because that's become less common, we felt like we need these, like, written studies so that that can supplement for
Mm.
what you should already be doing on your own.
Yeah.
and some of that
Not the new
may be true.
believers,
I
but,
mean,
like, people who have been in it for a while. Sorry.
yeah, and some of that is probably true. I mean, I don't know that the churches that Paul and I went to, we spent a lot of time learning the Bible. We did. And some of those, we look back and there were some strange ways they did that, but it was foundational to just putting in those habits that we now have today. That I think some of that, in our effort to, I don't know if it's this dramatic, but to continue to make the local church a relevant part of people's lives, we adjusted some things like that. That honestly, there is a segment of our next generation that doesn't know how to do that daily reading, praying, those kinds of things. And so we do have to put in
Yeah, instruction
things
in how
that,
to, yeah.
yeah, that help that come along. I still don't think, though, that it done in relationship is so much better than done in a class.
Oh, absolutely,
Or,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, all I meant was just
but
that, like, those types of, like, deep theological conversations came up naturally because it was already
yes,
top of mind,
you're right.
you
Yep.
know? Like, we
Yep.
did it anyways, we weren't studying something in particular, but we were all studying something, then we could bring in, like, our combined different things we were learning or wrestling with. I don't know, I just thought it was really awesome because it wasn't all about the same stuff. It's like, "Okay, well, I know it good, we can move on to the next question," or whatever.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question? Am I allowed to ask a question?
I guess so.
Man,
What?
changes up everything.
I know. So what do we change then to be different, to be something people look to as a different way in our culture today? What do we change? Because we've been doing the type of, yes, our focus is unique in that we really do try hard to make space for questions and for people who are seeking. But the way that we do church isn't super unlike how a lot of evangelicals are doing church.
Right.
So what do we change? That's the kind of thing that I'm, why I wanted to bring this up is those are the things I'm wrestling with. And I don't know that evangelicals have figured out what that looks like for this next generation.
Have people been told, like, how many pastors have you heard get up and tell their congregation or anybody, either group leaders or whatever, like, hey, the way that we're going to be effective is you guys inviting people to your house for dinner? I've never heard those words spoken ever before. I mean, I know that it's more than just saying that, but like, if we want that to happen, saying it's a good place to start. And so, that, and then also mirroring that. So like, my dad and my mom are super hospitable, so they just jumped in and started doing that anyways, right? And not everybody is gifted in that way. You gifted in some kind of way, and so
Do you have to be gifted?
Huh?
Do you have to be gifted to be friendly and hospitable?
no, I think some people are probably. I think hospitality a spiritual gift.
Yes.
That's all I meant.
Oh, okay.
But no, you don't have to be, because I wouldn't say that I necessarily am, but I love having people over.
Yeah, all I'm saying is it's not a gift, it's not a profession, it's
No.
not a title. Just be friendly to your neighbors
Yeah.
and your friends. And that includes having them over for dinner or going out to eat or spending time with it. It's not about a project. It's just about love thy neighbor. I mean, who said that?
I mean,
It's that.
Jesus Creed right there.
So, no, I know what you're saying, and it's interesting. Look at the people enfolded into the lives of your parents now because of that kind of hospitable, warm nature of them hosting things at their home. I mean, I can think of 4 or 5 names like that, whose experience in our church is deeper, fuller, richer because of your parents' hospitality. Not even a stretch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could it be as simple as helping people understand, we live in this world of individuality, that everything is about you and your success, your individual drive, your individual job, your individual happiness, pursuits, and all
Beliefs
those things.
too.
Beliefs. It's an individual salvation that we've kind of grown up with. Is just the recognition is that isn't what Jesus meant. That it isn't about you. It isn't about you. And it's about, and your folks, I think, are a good example of that. They intuitively recognize this isn't just about me. This is about who God created me to impact around me. And when you come and just sit in a service or you critique a talk or a worship and decide to go to a different talk or different worship, or not that that's a bad thing, but when it's because it's all about what individually are feeling or you individually are walking out as a Christ follower, you're never going to plant roots because it's about you, not about those around you and who you're impacting. And I think we spend a lot of time on your faith walk. You be with Jesus.
Not your spiritual journey. Don't say that. The
I
new
didn't.
agey stuff.
I didn't.
That's
But
right.
we do, right? We tell
Yeah.
you
No,
it's
we
your
do.
journey.
We
It's
cater
your
to individualism.
it's your study. It's individual. And we rarely talk about it's all of us together making that happen.
Yeah.
Like we as a group are the only way that it's going to look different to somebody else.
Yeah, whenever I teach an elective at Cibolo, I always make it a point at each evening that we gather. I make it a point to take the time to say, hey, do you know these people? Like, introduce one another. Otherwise, they could come in, sit in the chair, listen to me, download information, and then leave. And I'm always like, but that's not the point. This is just really an opportunity for me to see you guys get connected. And hopefully over the period of 4 or 5 weeks of whatever the study is, that some people are making connections. They start getting each other's names. They have now they have a shared experience with each other beyond just the Sunday morning service, because the end isn't download information. The end is connect people to family. And you have to be really intentional. So you were talking about like, what could the church do? Or you were asking. I mean, seriously, this has existed in my mind for a long time, but the pulling the trigger on something like this would totally blow things up for a time. What if there weren't chairs? There was just tables and chairs in circles on a Sunday morning. That was the auditorium. And you came in and you sat around a table. And then the sermon and even the worship, it was just engineered differently to get people talking rather than the pastor doing all the talking to get them doing the talking. The pastor's message was just some sort of creative prompt to get people discovering. And sure, there'd be all sorts of introverts and all sorts of people who are just consumers. They would run away from that so fast. But I think the depth of community that you could create if that was your Sunday experience, it would be extraordinary. Because I look back at a couple of things that we've done through the years where we did that. The auditorium was set up as tables. I think of a New Year's service that we did. What was the one? Taco
That was recently.
Talk about it.
Taco about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
We had
Dad joke title.
we
Uh-huh.
had it wasn't original to me.
That's all Tiffany.
I think that was Tiffany. But when you think about those times where we've engineered a service around people in circles eating, they have been extraordinary Sundays. I mean, like off the charts different.
I agree. And we just had this conversation in programming, and Tiffany, our communications director, said, those Sundays where something's just different and you can feel it. That's what happened in those
Yeah.
Sundays.
Like
Something
that
was
one,
different.
the one we did, we knew we couldn't get enough tables to seat everybody. So we just had, we had the rows set up and we did some semblance of like a service presentation. And then they went and got food and they came back in the auditorium. They just circled up chairs and it looked like a bomb went off in there. There's no order to the chairs. It's just
Chaos.
people finding each other. And then we released the kids and the kids were coming in there eating with families and they were crawling all over moms and dads. But the conversations and the connection that was happening there
Yep.
was extraordinary. What if that was your weekly experience?
There's one other one
be
that reminded me, as you're talking about it, was when we didn't have electricity
Yeah.
Oh,
and everything was unplugged and we didn't have any choice but to just do what
Yeah.
we could do. And it was that sense of like, well, we're just kind of all in this
together.
experience together and here we go. And the number of people who said, why don't we do that more often?
Yeah.
Like unplugged.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think how the leaders of the church handle a situation like that communicates a lot. We could have gotten all wigged out because, oh no, we don't have electricity and just created something very tense. Or you can just go, hey folks, what else are we going to do? We don't have any electricity. It's beyond our control, but we're all here together. So let's worship. Let me share what was on my heart. And it just had a warmth and a genuineness to it all that even with all the work we do as leaders to try to be genuine and warm and, really embody that, it was just something out of the ordinary that day. And it turned into something extraordinary.
It's amazing how when something like that happens, you just immediately start to you give yourself allowances for things not being perfect, and then it turns out better.
Ooh, that's
Like,
really good.
Huh.
I like that.
Yeah, you're like, oh,
So maybe God's in this. I don't know.
Maybe I was relying a little too much on myself.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
No, it's true. No, I like the idea. And you said, it would upend everything, but I think Jesus was kind of like that,
Yeah.
right? He just
Start doing it. Let's start
to upend
slow. Let's start doing
everything.
it once a month, but it's
Yeah.
random. They never know when it's coming. So that way they can't avoid it.
They'd be walking up the sidewalks going, are there
Uh-oh.
tables or chairs in there?
That's so true.
We're not telling you till you're in the auditorium.
And you can't leave. Doors closed.
Can't leave once you're in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. If a church is really wanting that sense of family and community and connection to happen, I think they're going to have to be courageous to do some really dramatically different things than what all the other churches are doing, not for the sake of being unique, but for the purpose and the vision of creating a different level of connection than what a typical Sunday morning spectator service provides.
Yeah. Well, and even, and I know like words are cheaper than doing something like that, I suppose. But like, I really do think that encouraging people that like they can do that, I guess, that they can actually just invite people, not that they need permission per se, but that's something to be, I guess, applauded, that we like applaud that type of like what you're doing, like,
Yes.
that type of behavior, and running initiatives to get people excited about it, or whatever. Like we run on initiatives for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that we talk about people getting connected, but again, we talk about it in the framework of kind of those more corporate sounding ways, and so they're like, yeah, I know, like small groups, but it's like, well, what if we talked about those, like your people hanging out at your house, for dinner?
Yeah,
And
years ago,
Yeah,
we
good
did
point.
a campaign, as you would describe it. They were called Matthew parties. So you take the story of Matthew inviting Jesus and Matthew's friends to his house so they could meet Jesus. So we invited people, hey, let's do Matthew parties. And so just invite your friends over to dinner. And the only thing that we're going to ask you to do is somehow very, graciously and very organically, just extend an invitation to come and visit our church. You don't have to witness to them, quote unquote. You don't have to break out your Bible and have some kind of, just invite your friends over, have a meal together, barbecue in the back, or do burgers and dogs, whatever the deal. Just throw a party at your house and invite friends to Cibolo Creek. And the truth of the matter is we had maybe, 3 or 4 parties that actually took place. But it was fun to watch the energy of those hosts who did have a party, and they were like, oh, well, this is evangelism I can do. I don't have to know, some response to some complicated question that comes up with an apologetic kind of perspective of telling people about my faith. I can just love them and invite them to my church. And I know my church is a resource to maybe help facilitate a spiritual growth. I was going to say journey, but evidently I'm not allowed to say. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's other ways that we could be doing church that, again, would be very disruptive, and probably initially you'd watch more people not engage. But I think the people that did engage, and as it blossomed, it could be extraordinary. I agree.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation of Cibolo Creek Community Church. If you did, please consider supporting the ministry of our church. Your donations make a difference. To check out more resources or to share a gift, please visit us at cibolocreek.com. Thanks for listening.